everyone.
Hi.
Thank you guys for joining us today. I am Kayleen Heaton. I'm a Professional Development Specialist with the Illinois Student Assistance Commission.
And I am also a Professional Development Specialist with the Illinois Student Assistance Commission.
And today we are joining you from our Deerfield office. We are going to be starting a Facebook Live series. For those of you that have been following our Facebook page, you might remember we did this back this year starting in October. We had a bunch of Facebook Live events that we then recorded and had people, tuning in for, and we covered a various range of topics. But that was kind of a hit, so we decided we were going to bring it back. So we'll be doing these Facebook Live events through the spring as well, and we're going to be covering a variety of topics ranging from, kind of all things financial aid. But today specifically, we're going to be talking about verification. So what's the first thing that you think of when you think of verification, Megan?
I think it's really scary. A lot of students think verification means something bad, but verification is actually relatively easy for most students, or can be an easy process as long as you're submitting the documentation requested by the school. So verification is a process in which a school is requesting information to double check from the student. And so my own personal experience with verification is that I was verified all 5 years of school. And so that means that I had to submit documentation saying that, yes, I was in college, but as well as my brother. What about you, Kayleen? Did you go through verification when you were in school?
I did. I was also selected, I think I was selected 3 out of my 4 years of college. But with verification, the way that I like to describe it to students, it's a lot like if you were going through airport security and the TSA stopped you and said, hey, we want to search your bag. Verification is very much the same, because if you get selected for verification and they say, hey, we would like these additional documentations from you, you are not able to get your financial aid package until you comply with verification. So until you give them the documents that they're requesting. Just like if you're at the airport, TSA asks to search your bags. If you say, oh, no, thanks, I'm good, they'll say that's fine, but you're not getting on the plane. So the same kind of operation with verification occurs. So when you get selected for verification, there's a couple of different ways that you can be notified. There's actually different ways of being selected for verification. So if you complete your FAFSA, and you'll get something called a student aid report, or the SAR. On that student aid report, it's going to have your EFC on there, and it's also going to give you information about the FAFSA that you just completed. It's going to let you know if you're eligible for some federal programs, so whether you're eligible for Pell and the amount of student loans and things like that. But you'll notice on your student aid report, if you see an asterisk, which is like that little star character next to your EFC, that means that your FAFSA has been selected for verification through the central processing system. So that's like through the Department of Ed's system, that once you submit a FAFSA, all FAFSAs go through the central processing system and they just do data matching. So sometimes FAFSAs get selected for verification through the central processing system. So you will know if you've been selected through the central processing system if you have that asterisk on your SAR. What that means is that any school that receives your FAFSA has to select you for verification. So it's good to know when you get that SAR, if you see the asterisk, you know what to expect. Okay, hey, you've been flagged for verification. Every school that's going to get your FAFSA then is the financial aid office will reach out and say, hey, we're selecting you for verification, and they'll tell you what documents you need to turn in. However, if you do not see an asterisk on your student aid report, it means you weren't selected for verification through that central processing system that the Department of Ed has, but each school has its own policies and regulations regarding verification, so schools can also select you even if you weren't selected through central processing system. So sometimes, your FAFSA might not have been flagged with an asterisk. However, you might go to a school and they say, hey, we're going to select you for verification. That would just depend on the school.
Right, so as Kayleen's mentioning, right, through the school, as a school's policies and procedures, they have to verify a certain number of students as well, right? So some of that information, if they find a data inconsistency, they have to resolve that inconsistency. So some of the forms that a student may need to fill out is a household verification, which is a very common form. Our schools have a version of it, I would say. The Department of Ed has a sample of it on their website. But as well as student could be selected for verification for income. So most high school students, they maybe not get a W-2, but they still worked over the summer, right? I worked over the summer in high school. And so they still earned income from work, but so they still have to report that on their FAFSA, right? And so with this, the school say, okay, we just need to verify that that's how much you made. Same with the parents. Parents may need to verify that information as well. Some verification processes for parents may look a little bit different for students. Some parents will need to request a tax return transcript.
Yes.
So a tax return transcript is one of the most common ways in order to verify the tax information. A tax return transcript comes from the from the IRS, from the IRS, and you can order it by mail, online, or by the phone. And it is a format in which the schools say, okay, this is the information that matches up if you have to manually input your tax information on the FAFSA. And so the tax return transcript verifies that information. For some parents, they don't have to file taxes, so they have to request a verification of non-filing letter. And a verification of non-filing letter says that, doesn't necessarily say that they weren't required to file taxes. It just means that they did not file taxes for that year, that the IRS has nothing on file for them, which is still okay, but it just means that there's nothing there that they have on file. So parents may need to select that information or provide that information, right? So be mindful of that.
Yeah. And it can get confusing when we talk about verification, the different documents that, you can submit that will, are considered acceptable documentation to get you through verification. The good thing to know is you don't have to memorize all of the different documents and things and what you would have to submit. All you have to know is that the financial aid office, they are going to reach out to you at the school that is selecting you for verification, and they're going to let you know, hey, this is the documentation that we need from you. So that part is at least straightforward. The schools, the financial aid office, they are the people to go to. If you find out you've been flagged for verification, say, hey, what documentation do I need to turn in? And they'll be able to tell you exactly what you need to turn in. And with verification, it's actually extremely important to only give them the documentation that they have requested. So sometimes people can get a little overexcited if they've been selected for verification. They're like, oh, I want to get my financial aid. I want to make sure I have things squared away. So they will request, the IRS tax return transcript and the verification of, non-filing and all sorts of different things and W-2s. And then they will give that all to the financial aid office. Do not do that. That makes more work on the financial aid office. And then any information you give them, they're obligated to review. So then they have to spend the time going through all of those documents. So save the hassle and make sure that you are only giving them the documentation that they ask for, because that is the only thing that is holding you up in verification. I think the biggest thing with verification that tends to trip students up is, again, if you're selected for verification and you do nothing about it, it is a hold on your financial aid offer. So you will not be able to get your financial aid until you comply with verification. So I know a lot of students don't always check their school emails, or might really not be paying too much attention when they're still in high school to the emails that are coming from colleges. However, it is super important, if you are notified that you're selected for verification, you have to be sure that you submit the documentation you need. Otherwise, there's going to be a hold on your account, and if you don't do anything, you'll show up in the fall to your college campus, and they'll say, yeah, you have to pay for the entire cost of attendance or whatever the case may be, because all of your financial aid is on hold. You're in verification.
I think that makes a really great point, Keeleen, because not just checking a student's email, but also checking their student portal, right? That's where the documents will be uploaded. The schools may not necessarily email the student the documents. The email just may be pretty generic and say, hey, we've uploaded some documents to your student profile or your student portal, and log in with the account information that we've given you to check that information out, right? So it's super important to have your student be checking probably once a week, I would say, maybe twice a week, just depending how much information you're having to report. But check it once a week, especially if you've applied to multiple schools. And if you did get that asterisk on your SAR, your student aid report, and you applied, say, to 10 schools, you have to submit paperwork for all 10 schools. Yeah. And so that's a lot of paperwork, actually. Yes. So you have to make sure you're checking all of those student portals, right, to say, okay, yes, I need to submit this, or I need to submit this form. But as well as understanding that, walking through the financial aid office will walk you through the process. They're there to help you. You, of course, can always call them, go in, especially if they're out of state. Calling is probably the best option. But ask to speak to a financial aid counselor or the counselor assigned to your caseload. And so say, hey, I have some questions, right? What do I need to fill out? Where can I find these forms if I'm having trouble accessing my student portal? The financial aid office often has a website on the homepage of the school. So I go to Northern at NIU, and Northern has their own site, right, for the Office of Financial Aid and Scholarships. And they have a tab that says forms, where they can find the current forms for the school year that they're requesting. And many schools do that as well.
Oh, yeah. And with verification, too, I think it's important to understand the purpose behind it, because a lot of people get freaked out and think that they were selected for verification because they've done something wrong. That is not necessarily the case. So the reason verification even exists is because if you think about it, the information that is reported on the FAFSA is, for the most part, self-reported. Unless you're using the IRS data retrieval tool, and we'll get into why you should always use the IRS data retrieval tool if you're eligible to, but everything is self-reported unless you're using that IRS data retrieval tool. So essentially, verification is the school's way of saying, okay, this is the information reported on the FAFSA. Can you just provide us some type of documentation to corroborate so that we know, the numbers you provided on the FAFSA match with the actual documentation that you're able to provide us. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Schools select students for verification for a ton of different reasons. Some schools have random selection where they will randomly select some of their students. Schools are going to select if there's any type of, maybe say, you've been there for 2 or 3 years at the school, you're either a sophomore or a junior, and if income changed drastically from year to year, that might be a flag for verification. So there's many different reasons why you might get flagged for verification. Don't assume it's a bad thing, and don't assume that if you are flagged for verification, you're not going to get your financial aid. Each year that I was flagged, I just had to give them the documentation. They matched it up to what was on the FAFSA, and then I got all of my financial aid. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not a bad thing. A lot of people tend to think of it like, oh, it's an audit, or this is bad, they think I'm doing something wrong. That's not necessarily the case. The key is you just want to make sure, again, that you're not ignoring it. And if you are selected for verification, you are following through and giving them the documentation that they are requesting.
So Kayleen mentioned the IRS data retrieval tool, and that is a program that is built into the FAFSA application, which allows students and parents to import their tax information if they're eligible. And so if a family chooses not to use the IRS data retrieval tool, what will happen is they'll have to manually enter all of their tax information or their income earned from work, right? Mm-hmm. So with this, what they'll need to do then, and that's where their tax return transcript comes in. The school may request them to submit a tax return transcript to verify the information that they manually typed in on the FAFSA. And with this, that will then say if there were any data inconsistencies or if something didn't match up. We've seen sometimes that parents accidentally type in their tax information twice. Yeah. The student made $60,000, which wasn't true, right? Mm-hmm. So they think that, I typed it in, well, I type it in again, right? And so the school will see that and say, oh, there was that data inconsistency. Then the student just needs to make a correction, right? So, but if a student does not use the IRS data retrieval tool or the parent, they'll have to manually input the information and then potentially, most highly likely, submit a tax return transcript to the school to verify the information.
Mm-hmm. And the nice thing to know that when you are completing a FAFSA, if you're eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool, you're going to receive the prompt that says link to the IRS. If you do that, the reason that you don't get selected for verification if you use the IRS data retrieval tool is because when you use the IRS data retrieval tool, what's happening is it is a connection that the Department of Education has with the IRS. So when you type in your information, it automatically pulls all of your tax data that is on file with the IRS and inputs it into your FAFSA. So when you submit your FAFSA on the college's ends, they're able to see that, all of the tax data here was transferred from the IRS, so I know that this information came from the IRS and that the student or the parent wasn't able to edit or change those numbers. So that's why if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, you won't be selected for verification based off of the tax data, because the school can already see that, this tax data came directly from the IRS. The only case or the only kind of exception is if an amended return is on file. If you did file an amended return and you use the IRS data retrieval tool, the financial aid office will still have to flag you for verification because it won't pull the amended return. It'll pull the original return, but it'll notify the school that there was an amended return on file. So that's kind of the only exception. But otherwise, if you use that IRS data retrieval tool, you won't be selected for verification, at least for the tax data piece.
Sure. So then there are other things why a student could be selected for verification. One of them is household size, right? So there's only 3 members in my household, where Kayleen has several brothers. Mm-hmm. So her household's bigger than mine, right? And so on her FAFSA, depending how many she put on her household size, plus the number enrolled in college, that is one way a student can be selected for verification. Some other, right, we've talked about the U.S. income tax as well as the income tax paid. Some other things is the non-filers. So some parents don't file taxes, which is okay. Or some students don't file taxes either, because they don't make enough. But the parents may need to submit again the verification of non-filing form. High school completion status. The school wants to make sure the student graduated either with a high school diploma or a GED. And then lastly, maybe potentially identity or statement of purpose. This is for some individuals to make sure that if their identity's been stolen, right, that's the information that's being true. The student is inputting the correct information. Also could be somebody has the same last name or the same first name, right, or the same name totally, and they just want to make sure they're matching up that information.
And the important thing to know is, as I had mentioned before, if you get selected for verification through your student aid report, through the central processing system, if you see the asterisks and you know, okay, every school that gets my FAFSA will be selecting me for verification, each school might request a different type of documentation. So again, it is extremely important that you're talking to the financial aid office of the specific school and asking them what documentation that they want, because just because you've been selected for verification at, you know, all 5 of the schools you've applied to, doesn't mean that they're going to ask you for the exact same form from each of them. So you want to make sure that you're only turning in the form that the specific school has requested. Good example of that is a lot of times if you get selected for verification of household size, so this is where they just want to say, okay, you listed that there were 6 people in your household. We just want, you know, the names and the relationship to all of those 6 peoples, and then you sign the form saying that, yes, these are the people that are in my household. Some schools have their own type of form for this. Some schools might require you to write kind of a personal statement type thing, or just like a little blurb about who is in there and sign it. And some schools have like pre-formatted charts that are really easy to use. So it's just going to depend on the school as to what type of documentation they're going to want from you and as to how they're going to turn it in, or into how they're going to ask you to turn it in. So again, it is super, super important that if you are selected for verification, you're making sure that you are reaching out to the college to figure out, okay, what documentation do you want from me? Additionally, there's something that I think it's really important to touch on that the Department of Education actually at their conference this upcoming year was talking a lot about, but it's this kind of phenomenon called verification melt. So what verification melt is, it's when a student gets accepted into a school and then they, you know, complete their FAFSA and everything, and then their FAFSA gets flagged for verification. And then verification melt is when that student just stays in verification and doesn't end up actually enrolling and going to school that upcoming fall because they were flagged for verification and they couldn't quite get themselves out of the process. So that's why they call it verification melt, because it's once the student gets selected for verification, they kind of melt down and they don't end up going through with their plans of attending the university. So at ISAC, we are really focused on trying to help students through the verification melt piece by helping them to complete that process of verification. So we do have some resources that I want to make you guys aware of, where if you are flagged for verification, there are people out there, there are free services, free people. There are people whose services are free to kind of help you through that process. So first off is our ISAC core. Megan, you want to touch on the ISAC core a bit?
So Kayleen and I actually were ISAC core members before we joined the professional development team. And so the ISAC core is a group of near-peer mentors that we have recently graduated college. And so what they do is they go out into schools, community-based organizations. They work really closely with high school seniors as well as juniors, sophomores, and freshmen to talk about the financial aid process, navigating the college-going process, but also helping a student, send transcripts, right, or sending their SAT scores, XYZ. And so what they do is they work in different varieties with students, with parents to complete a FAFSA or help them complete the alternative application, which just was released this January. And as well as, so the core does lots of different things. They give lots of presentations, they do different activities with students, some early awareness as well with younger students to get them say, hey, this is what the information is about financial aid or just financial information in general, such as banking. Another resource is our ISAC's homepage, and so we have a lot of content on our homepage to get parents and students through this process, right? Verification, as we keep saying, is not a bad thing. It's pretty normal for most students, and so understanding that process and just saying, yep, okay, we need to submit this information, but then, okay, well, I'm not sure what this is. In doubt, call ISAC, our hotline number, or call the financial aid office, right? They are a great resource as well to have if you have any specific questions of like, well, I'm not sure why this document is being requested. What other resources do we have, Kayleen, that we think are important?
And I would just point out with our ISAC core, if you go to the ISAC student portal, you're able to look up your core member. So you type in your zip code and it's going to let you know the core member that is working within your district or nearest you. And then if you do have questions about verification, and if you're like, oh my goodness, I've been selected and I've been selected at all of my schools and this is a big process and I want some help with it, you can send an email, you can text. The phone number, the email of the core member, as well as the photo and their name appears when you use that ISAC student portal search your core member. So then you can reach out to them and just ask if there's a time that you can meet up, or sometimes it's something that you could even, complete over a phone conversation. So just having a phone call with them, because core members are very familiar with the different documents that schools tend to request and the process for, okay, how do you request, an IRS tax return transcript? How do you request a verification non-filing letter? The core members are very familiar with those processes, so they can help you through that. Which can be a big peace of mind, especially if you've been selected at multiple schools and you're thinking this is a lot of paperwork and it sounds very official and it can sound very scary. But the core members are there to really walk you through that process. So I would definitely suggest, if you've been selected for verification and you're worried about trying to complete it, reaching out to your core member or reaching out to your financial aid office. Because again, the financial aid office, these are the people that are going to tell you exactly what type of document you need to turn in. And a lot of times they have like instruction sheets of how to request the specific documents, because this is the specific document that they ask of all students that are selected for that, specific item of verification. So they're very familiar with how to get those documents and what you will have to do. The last little piece, because we've got some time that I want to touch on, is something, it's different from verification. It's called professional judgment. So with professional judgment, this occurs in the instance that the information that you reported on the FAFSA is no longer the financial situation in your household. So we have to keep in mind that when you're completing the FAFSA, you complete it with what is known as prior tax year data. And that's because if you just sat down and you completed the 2020-21 FAFSA, you completed it, on October 1st of 2019, right when it released. You completed the 2020-21 FAFSA on October of 2019. When you're completing that 2020-21 FAFSA, it is asking you for your 2018 tax data. So it's important to realize that there is a 2-year gap between the time you'll actually get to school, which is the 2020-2021 school year, and the tax data that shows up on your FAFSA, which is from 2018. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in that time. There's sometimes a loss of income because, a parent might have been laid off from a job. Sometimes there's a death that results in, big financial changes. Sometimes there's a divorce or there's a marriage or something occurs where the finances that were the financial situation that was listed on your FAFSA and that kind of showed up in your taxes and everything is no longer the same. You can request what is called a professional judgment. So a professional judgment is when you go to the financial aid office of the institution and you say, hey, I have a kind of extenuating circumstance where my FAFSA no longer matches up with the financial situation in my household. The financial aid office will be able to tell you, okay, so this is the situation that you say you have. Say, you said parent passed away. So there's been a massive loss of income. They'll ask you for some type of documentation, possibly a death certificate, something like that to corroborate. And then they are able to go in and make adjustments to your financial aid package based off of that new document that has come, or that new documentation that has come in.
Right, so with professional judgment, as Kaylee's talking about, right, they may need to submit all this extra documentation potentially, or other information saying like, yeah, this is our current situation. But just be mindful, students potentially will go through verification each year. And so, like I had mentioned earlier, I was selected for verification all 5 years of school. And so I had to then be reminded, like the school emailed me where I went to school, and I had to still go back on my student portal and check out those documents and make sure, hey, what else did I get selected verification for? So some students may get selected for verification every year, some may not, right? Just be conscious of that. And so just remember that, again, it's something that's completely normal for most students, and it's a process that can take some length of time, but know that work through the process. If you have questions, contact your ISAC core member, contact us here at ISAC, or contact the financial aid office, and they'll be able to walk you through that process.
Yeah, and I also think it's really good to know about professional judgment, because sometimes there are those situations where you're like, the FAFSA doesn't allow me to explain the specific situation that's happening, but there's some reason why, what's on the FAFSA is no longer indicative of the current situation going on in the household. So you do have that option of professional judgment. The one piece that I do want to stress is that if you are going to go through with professional judgment, it is at the authority of the financial aid administrator at the specific institution. So say you're applying to 3 different schools and you say that, I have this special circumstance, say maybe my mom is sick and we have very, very high medical bills. So the financial situation, even though it's showing this on our FAFSA, it's drastically different because a lot of our money is going to medical expenses. Each school is going to determine whether or not they'll grant a professional judgment, and they're going to determine how much and kind of how the numbers are going to shake out. So it is extremely important to know that, you might have one school that says, no, we're not granting you professional judgment for this because the medical bills aren't significant enough, or you might have another school that says, actually, yes, we'll be able to grant you professional judgment, and this is how we'll make that adjustment. So it just depends on the institution. The key is it never hurts to ask. If you think you have a special circumstance that might qualify you for a professional judgment, the worst thing that they can say is no, but it's not like they're going to say no and we take away any of your financial aid for asking. So it is just important to know if you do find yourself in a situation where you think you have some type of extenuating circumstances, you can go through with professional judgment at the financial aid office at the institution. Anything else you want to touch on with professional judgment?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. It's something that it's case by case, as Kayleen
Yes.
is saying. So as Kayleen mentioned, right, just because one school is giving you professional judgment here, but another school is not, it's up to the school's discretion, right? And the financial aid administrator, it's up to their authority. It's case by case. So if you think you have a special circumstance, as Kayleen's saying, talk to the financial aid office. They're going to know their own policies and procedures for their own office, but as well as keeping in mind federal regulation, right? That they still have to follow those regulations as well.
And that's an excellent point too. With verification, it's the same thing. Each school or each financial aid administrator, they have to make determinations about verification on the basis of adequate documentation. So that's kind of a loose term, but it gives them some discretion in, okay, what do they think is adequate documentation? That's why you might see different things requested from different schools. So you might be requesting, to verify household size. One school might be asking you for this particular form, another school might be asking you for, two different things. It just depends because it's up to the school and what they think is adequate documentation. That's going to determine what type of documents you actually have to be turning in. So some other things that I just want to highlight before we are done. Again, I had mentioned this is our Facebook series that we are going to be doing, and you're going to be seeing a lot of our faces. So again, I'm Kayleen.
And I'm Megan.
This is Megan. But you will be seeing the rest of our training team, with exception to one of our trainers. You'll be seeing all of us during these Facebook events. If you are ever joining us live, so if you are ever on it right when we are live, you can always feel free to enter any questions that you have because we do keep an eye and we monitor the chats. However, we know that a lot of people tend to watch these recordings after the fact. So if that's the case, then hopefully this is helpful to you. And that'll be nice too because we will be recording every single one of these Facebook Live videos. I also want to make a mention that our next Facebook Live is next week on Monday. So it's going to be next week on Monday. And it is going to be on verification, so the same topic, except it's going to be in Spanish. So we have two of our Spanish speakers that are going to come on, and they're going to be covering the same information, the same topics, but they will be covering that in Spanish.
We will do most of our Facebook Lives on Tuesdays. So even though just next week's on Monday, we'll do most of them on Tuesdays at this time at 10 a.m.
Yes.
So join us. Hopefully you can. And then if you do watch us after, if you have questions, right, you can email us at isac.outreachtraining@illinois.gov. Just spell out Illinois in the email. So again, it's isac.outreachtraining@illinois.gov.
Yes, and feel free to share these recordings if you are, if you're a counselor at a school or if you are a post-secondary coach or anything like that. You can feel free to share these recordings on your platform. So if you have any type of social media and you want to share it, we appreciate the more that we can get this information out there, the better. So please use this as you see fit. However, you can, get the word out to students. But with that being said, I think that is all that we have for you today. So thank you guys again for those of you that were on live. Thank you for joining us. And for if you decided to watch the recording, thank you for sticking with us. And then we look forward to seeing you guys next week and throughout the rest of the spring.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.